On the planet Tharnos Prime, danger was always lurking. It wasn't a place for the weak. The galaxy's most feared killers, bounty hunters, and mercenaries made it their home. Here, the Void Syndicate had built its stronghold. They were ruthless, trained to eliminate targets without hesitation. Their reputation stretched across the galaxy. No one dared to challenge them. No one, except for one kind of person, the Deathworlders. The Syndicate operated from the shadows, always one step ahead of their enemies. They had eyes everywhere. No one could get close without their permission. They were proud, confident, and feared. But that all changed when a red alert flashed across the screens. It wasn't for an attack, a space battle, or a raid. It was far worse. It was for an incoming Deathworlder. The message was simple but chilling. Deathworlder contact. Level 10 threat. For a moment, the room was silent. The Syndicate's top assassins looked at the message, unsure of what to do. Their faces, usually cold and calm, now showed signs of fear. They tried to hide it, but the tension was thick in the air. These were beings who had killed thousands without a second thought. And yet, something about this message froze them in place. Not again. Someone whispered. Is it them? Another voice asked, trembling. They were talking about the humans, the Deathworlders. The Syndicate had encountered humans before, but it never ended well for the criminals. The humans were different. They weren't like other races. They were harder, stronger, and more dangerous than anything the Syndicate had ever faced. When humans arrived, it meant death, even for those who thought they were untouchable. The Void Syndicate leaders, who had seen the galaxy's worst, began to speak in hushed tones. One leader, Orak, looked at the others with a deep frown. He was tall, with skin like cracked stone, and his eyes were sharp like a predator. But even he seemed shaken. Everyone, Orak said quietly, we need to leave. Now. There was no arguing. Orak had spoken, and when he spoke, it meant action. Everyone knew the gravity of the situation. The Deathworlders didn't play by the rules. If a Deathworlder had come to Tharnos Prime, it wasn't just a problem for the Syndicate. It was a death sentence. The station, once filled with the sounds of weapons being polished and bounty contracts being signed, fell silent. In a rush, the assassins began to gather their things. Their faces showed no emotion, but their movements were quick and frantic. They were preparing to disappear. Some packed weapons, some took off their masks and hoods, blending into the crowds. A few even tried to leave the station entirely, looking for escape pods. They didn't need to be told twice. They had learned the hard way. When Deathworlders arrived, survival was no longer guaranteed. As the panic spread, more and more members of the Syndicate tried to vanish into the streets of Tharnos Prime. They hoped they could outrun what was coming, but they knew it was a futile attempt. The one thing they couldn't escape was the fear that gripped their hearts. Meanwhile, Commander Reyes, the human Deathworlder, was on his way. He hadn't made a sound as his ship entered orbit. He didn't need to announce his arrival. It was the silence that terrified them. The killers, the bounty hunters, and the mercenaries, they all knew one thing for certain now. Deathworlders didn't announce themselves. They didn't need to. Reyes' reputation had spread far and wide. Every assassin knew what happened when a human walked into town. They'd vanished. And Reyes was known to be the deadliest of them all. No one had ever survived an encounter with him. The tales of his strength, his speed, and his ferocity had become legends. Still, no one fully understood what made him so dangerous. It wasn't just his skill with weapons or his ability to fight. It was something deeper. A human born and trained on a death world became something more. Something the galaxy had never seen before. As Reyes' ship landed on the surface of Tharnos Prime, the fear was palpable. There was no loud announcement, no grand entrance, just the silent arrival of a force that could not be ignored. By the time he stepped off his ship, the Syndicate was already in full retreat. The streets, once busy and lively, were now eerily empty. The lights flickered in the windows as if even the station itself was afraid. The only sound that remained was the soft echo of Ray's footsteps as he walked toward the heart of the Syndicate's territory. They were running, but he wasn't chasing them. He was just waiting. They would find him. They always did. And when they did, the real horror would begin. The ship's door opened with a soft hiss, revealing a figure who seemed almost ordinary at first glance. He stepped down onto the dusty surface of Tharnos Prime, his boots making barely a sound as they met the ground. But the moment he appeared, the entire atmosphere seemed to shift. Commander Reyes didn't look like a hero or a villain. He was just a man, standing tall and calm, but there was something in his presence that felt wrong. His clothes were simple, his movements steady, but it was the way he carried himself that struck fear into those who witnessed his arrival. He wasn't armed, yet no one dared approach him. Locals watched from windows, behind corners, and from the safety of their homes, their eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and dread. Some whispered to each other, exchanging stories they'd heard about humans. Others stood frozen, not knowing what to do. "Is it really him?" One voice barely managed to whisper. "How did he find us?" Another asked, voice cracking with fear. Reyes didn't acknowledge the whispers, nor did he seem to care about the growing number of eyes on him. His mission was clear. He didn't need to announce himself. The way he moved, the way he acted, told everyone all they needed to know. He wasn't here to play games. As Reyes walked, the streets seemed to clear. The once bustling market was silent. The bustling noises of conversations and salespeople stopped. Even the children, who had once run and played under the bright lights of the city, suddenly vanished into their homes. The few brave enough to look out from behind barriers quickly disappeared too. It was as if the whole city understood that something huge was about to happen, and they wanted no part in it. One of the Syndicate's lesser-known bounty hunters, a tall, wiry alien named Grill who had survived more than a few confrontations, tried to stop Reyes. Grill wasn't known for fear, and he was proud of his reputation as someone who didn't back down from anyone. He was a skilled fighter, quick with a blade, and had faced death itself several times. But when he saw Reyes, something deep inside him shifted. He didn't know why, but he had a feeling that this would be his last stand if he acted now. Grill stepped forward, drawing his blade. He thought to himself that he'd deal with this human the same way he dealt with any threat, quickly and decisively. But before he could make his move, Reyes simply turned his head. The stillness in Reyes' gaze made Grill freeze. There was no challenge, no warning, just the calm intensity in his eyes. Reyes didn't move a muscle, but Grill felt his body tense up. He knew instinctively that he was no match for the human standing before him. Something about Reyes' calmness, the ease with which he stood there, made Grill question everything he thought he knew about strength and power. Without a word, Grill dropped his blade. His hand shook as he tried to hold onto it, but it slipped from his grasp, falling to the ground with a soft clink. He stepped back, then turned and hurried away. He didn't need to be told twice. Something in his instincts screamed that if he didn't leave now, he wouldn't make it out alive. Reyes didn't even acknowledge him as he walked on, his steps steady, his eyes fixed on his goal. He wasn't hunting anyone. He was simply walking through the streets like it was his home. The people who had gathered outside began to whisper among themselves. They watched in awe as Reyes passed them, his presence leaving an undeniable mark on everyone who saw him. No one spoke directly to him, not because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't. There was a kind of awe in their silence, a fear mixed with fascination. He wasn't just any human. He wasn't even just any Deathworlder. There was something uniquely terrifying about the way he existed in this world. Back at the Syndicate headquarters, the leaders were beginning to feel the weight of the situation. Orak, the tall and fearsome leader of the Syndicate, watched the feeds in silence. His face was stone, but his mind was racing. He had heard the stories. He knew what was coming, and he knew that nothing in their arsenal could stop it. He turned to his second-in-command, Zelkor, a seasoned warrior who had fought in more than his fair share of battles. "This is different," Auric muttered. "We can't fight this." Zelkor glanced nervously at the monitors, where Reyes' image still appeared. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice almost breaking. "We wait," Auric replied. His voice was steady, but it lacked its usual confidence. "And we pray he doesn't come for us next." In the streets, the tension was growing. The air was thick with fear, but there was also something else, something more difficult to understand. People were starting to talk about the human, not just with fear, but with respect. They saw what he did to Grill, and though they feared the unknown, there was something magnetic about him, something they couldn't ignore, something that made them feel, for the first time, that the humans might be unstoppable. Reyes was only getting closer, and the closer he got, the more uncertain the syndicate became. They knew they couldn't run forever. Eventually, they would have to face him. But for now, they were just waiting, watching, and hoping the storm would pass. But in their hearts, they all knew the truth. Deathworlders don't leave. They didn't just arrive to destroy. They arrived to change everything. And the syndicate, for all its power and reputation, was about to find out what it meant to be in the path of a Deathworlder. The streets of Farnos Prime were eerily quiet now. People who had once filled the crowded markets and busy alleys were hiding in their homes, watching from windows or behind locked doors. The energy of the place had shifted from bustling life to pure, tense silence. Only the occasional whisper could be heard as people exchanged nervous glances, wondering just how long this strange calm would last. Reyes moved through the city with purpose, never pausing, never rushing. His footsteps echoed softly in the empty streets as he walked. He wasn't looking for anyone, not in the way most would expect. He wasn't here for a fight. He was here because he had a mission, a quiet, determined mission. And as he walked, he felt the weight of the eyes upon him. But he didn't acknowledge them. He didn't need to. He was used to being watched. In the hidden chambers deep beneath the surface of Farnos Prime, the leaders of the Void Syndicate were making plans. They weren't used to fear. They weren't used to running. These were beings who had controlled entire systems, who had dealt with countless enemies and won. But something about Reyes was different. He wasn't like anything they had ever faced before, and they were starting to realize that. Auric, the leader of the Syndicate, paced back and forth in the command room. His mind raced with possibilities, but none of them felt right. He had sent out scouts, had tried to gather information, but every attempt had failed. Reyes wasn't acting like any enemy they had ever encountered. He wasn't making threats or showing off his power. He wasn't here to prove anything. And that, more than anything, unsettled Auric. The human is already inside the city, Zelkor, his second-in-command, said, breaking the silence. "We've sent our best trackers, but they've seen nothing. No sign of him." Auric stopped pacing and turned to face his ally. "What do you mean, no sign? He's right there. How is it possible we haven't found him?" Zelkor's voice dropped. "It's like he disappears when we try to find him. We know he's here, we know he's moving, but it's as if he's just vanishing." For a moment, Auric was quiet. He had encountered many enemies in his time, and he had fought against some of the most skilled warriors in the galaxy. But none had been like this. "Then we'll need to act differently," Auric said, his voice hardening. "We won't find him by looking for him. We'll make him come to us." Reyes, meanwhile, was walking the streets with no particular hurry. He wasn't looking for a confrontation. He wasn't interested in a fight. But he knew what was coming. He had been through this before. Every time he arrived on a new world, there was always resistance. And the truth was, he didn't mind. He had faced much worse in his life. But it was never about proving who was stronger. It was about something much simpler: survival. As Reyes continued walking, he passed a group of Syndicate members huddled together in a shadowed alley. They were talking in hushed tones, trying to decide their next move. Reyes ignored them completely, moving forward without so much as a glance in their direction. The group watched him go, their eyes following his every step. Some of them were shaking, though they tried to hide it. They were killers, trained to deal with all sorts of dangers. But there was something in the way Reyes carried himself that made even the toughest of them pause. He didn't fear them. He wasn't even concerned with them, and that realization sent a chill through their spines. "We've got to do something," one of the syndicate members muttered, his voice quivering. "We can't just let him walk around like this. He'll find us." But no one responded. They didn't know what to do. They were used to controlling the situation, not reacting to it. And yet here they were, trying to figure out how to deal with a threat that didn't seem to care about their power, their reputation, or their weapons. Orek, growing more desperate, finally made a decision. He called for a meeting of the highest-ranking members of the syndicate. They would need to gather everything they had, intelligence, resources, and personnel, if they were going to even attempt to face the human. They couldn't afford any more mistakes. But as they prepared, something else was happening across the city. The tension was building. It was like a storm brewing on the horizon, something they could all feel but couldn't see yet. The syndicate was trying to act fast, but no matter how hard they tried to mobilize, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Reyes had already made his presence known in the most subtle way possible, by doing nothing at all. And then the most chilling thing happened. The moment Orek's meeting was called, the screens went black. Every communication system, every monitor, and every feed they relied on went dead. Silence took over the room. "Did you do this?" Orek demanded, turning to his crew. They shook their heads. "No, we didn't." For the first time, Orek felt true fear. They had tried to keep up with Reyes, tried to track him and understand his every move. But now, it felt like Reyes was one step ahead, always watching, always waiting, but never moving too fast. It was as if he was letting them chase shadows, letting them play his game. And now, with the blackout, they were trapped. They could only wait and wonder, what would happen next? How long would they last before they were forced to face the inevitable? In the streets, Reyes kept walking, his calm and steady pace undisturbed. He wasn't here to chase anyone. He wasn't here to prove anything. He was just waiting for the inevitable confrontation. The syndicate was playing their game, and Reyes was simply watching them fall into it. The fear in the air was thick, and it wasn't just the syndicate who felt it. The entire city was beginning to understand that this wasn't going to be like anything they'd ever seen before. And still, Reyes walked on, his journey just beginning. The city of Tharnos Prime was no longer a place of bustling activity. It had turned into a ghost town. The air was thick with tension, and every corner seemed to hide something unknown, something ominous. Reyes had been walking for hours, seemingly without purpose, yet there was a quiet intensity to his every movement. He wasn't in a hurry, but it was clear he wasn't going to stop until he had what he came for. Orek, the leader of the syndicate, paced nervously in his private chambers. The entire city was on lockdown, but it didn't seem to matter. They couldn't find Reyes. They couldn't track him, and they had no idea what his next move would be. This was not how things were supposed to go. The syndicate was supposed to be in control, but now they were at the mercy of one human, and that fact sent a ripple of fear through Orek's usually unshakable composure. "We need to take action," Zelkor said, his voice laced with worry. "We can't just sit here waiting for him to make the first move. We need a plan, and we need it now." Orek nodded, though his mind was racing with thoughts of what to do next. He had led many battles, dealt with many enemies, but nothing had prepared him for a situation like this. This wasn't a fight that could be won with force or strategy. It was something different, something that felt almost personal. It was as if Reyes wasn't interested in conquering or defeating the syndicate. He was simply playing a game where the syndicate didn't even know the rules. "They'll come for us, Orek," Zelkor continued, his voice more urgent. "We need to prepare the escape routes. If they cut us off, we're finished. We have to." But Aurak held up his hand, signaling for him to stop. "Don't say that. Don't speak of defeat. We're not done yet. We just need to think." His mind was turning, considering all their options, but none of them felt right. If Reyes wanted them dead, he would have already acted. But he hadn't. He was waiting, just like everyone else was. The waiting was the worst part. The uncertainty of it all gnawed at Aurak's thoughts. Meanwhile, Reyes had continued his journey, passing through narrow streets and dark alleys, moving with the same calm, unhurried pace. He wasn't running or hiding, and yet he never seemed to be in one place for long. Those who dared to peek out from behind doors saw him pass, always on the move, but never stopping. It was almost as if he was marking the entire city, observing everything, seeing the bigger picture that no one else could grasp. Reyes knew what they were doing. The Syndicate, even with all their power and influence, was flailing. They didn't know how to respond. They had no strategy for dealing with someone like him, someone who didn't play by the usual rules. And that, in itself, was part of the problem. They had been the ones in control for so long that they had forgotten what it was like to be hunted. The people of Tharnos Prime were no longer hiding from Reyes. They were hiding from the unknown. They were hiding from the fear that filled the air like a fog. It wasn't Reyes that scared them. It was the fact that they had no idea when he would strike or what would happen when he did. It was this sense of helplessness, this sense that the future was out of their control, that gripped everyone in the city. Reyes passed by a building, his eyes scanning the dark windows. He didn't care about the building or the people inside. He was simply observing, waiting, allowing the city to react to his presence. There was no rush. There was no urgency. He wasn't interested in forcing anything. He was simply there. A small group of Syndicate operatives gathered in a darkened room, nervously discussing their next move. They were well trained, but they were beginning to feel the weight of the situation. It wasn't just that they couldn't find Reyes. It was that they couldn't even predict his movements. It was as if he were always one step ahead, even when they thought they had a plan. "We can't let this drag on any longer," one of them said, his voice tight with anxiety. "We need to make our move before he makes his." "But how?" another voice questioned. "We don't even know where he is. We've been tracking him all over the city, and yet he's still out there somewhere." The room fell silent, the tension growing heavier with each passing second. Reyes wasn't just wandering aimlessly. He was systematically wearing them down. He wasn't attacking, but every moment that passed without a confrontation took its toll. The uncertainty, the waiting, was worse than anything else. It gnawed at their nerves, chipped away at their confidence. And deep down, they knew something they hadn't been willing to admit before. They were no longer in control. As the days passed, the city's people began to realize that the fear wasn't just about Reyes. It was about what was coming next. They had seen powerful armies, invincible leaders, and weapons of mass destruction, but nothing had prepared them for this. The arrival of one single human had turned their world upside down. And now, they were all caught in the quiet storm he had created. Reyes wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't demanding surrender or laying waste to entire neighborhoods. He wasn't seeking revenge or retribution. He wasn't here to destroy. He was here to make them understand something simple, that their power, their control, their confidence meant nothing when faced with the unknown, when faced with something they couldn't understand, something they had never seen before. Everything they had built was irrelevant. The waiting continued. For Reyes, there was no hurry. For the Syndicate, there was no plan that would save them. They had become like shadows, scrambling to stay out of the light, unaware that the light was already on them. And in the center of it all, Reyes walked on, his mission still unclear to those who watched him, but simple to him, to see how far they would go before they broke. The sun dipped low over Tharnos Prime, casting long shadows across the city. For most, it would have been the time to relax, to reflect on the day's events and prepare for what tomorrow would bring. But for the people of Farnus Prime, this moment of calm was anything but peaceful. The tension was still thick in the air, heavier than it had ever been. The streets were nearly deserted, the markets had closed early, and most shops were locked tight. Everyone was waiting, unsure of what would happen next, but dreading it all the same. The constant fear of the unknown had taken root in the hearts of the citizens. No one dared to venture out, and no one knew when it would end. Reyes, however, seemed unaffected by the growing uncertainty around him. His every step was measured and deliberate, his eyes scanning the city with a quiet intensity. He wasn't looking for confrontation, but he wasn't avoiding it either. In fact, he wasn't concerned with anything outside of the task at hand. He was simply walking, waiting, and observing. As Reyes moved through the city, his presence was like a shadow, always just out of reach. People caught fleeting glimpses of him through windows, or saw his silhouette disappearing around corners, but they never saw him clearly. It was as if he was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. He was a part of the city now, as much a part of its pulse as the people who lived in it. Yet no one could grasp him, no one could pin him down. The Syndicate, on the other hand, was growing desperate. Orak sat in his command room, his eyes fixed on the screens that now displayed static. His team had been unable to regain control of the city's communication systems, and their search efforts were futile. It had been days since the blackout, and Reyes had remained elusive, slipping through their fingers with each passing moment. "What are we missing?" Orak muttered to himself, running a hand over his face in frustration. He couldn't afford to be careless now. The longer this dragged on, the more it seemed like the Syndicate was losing its grip on the situation. Reyes had turned the tables on them. He had made them doubt their abilities, their intelligence. Zelkor, ever the pragmatist, was pacing back and forth in the corner of the room. "Orak, we can't continue like this. We're just sitting here, reacting. We need to make a decision. We can't keep waiting. The city's almost empty. The people are scared. We need to strike before they start turning on us." Orak shot him a sharp look. "What do you suggest we do? Every time we try something, he's already gone. We don't even know what he's planning, if he's planning anything at all. We're playing his game." Zelkor paused, his face a mask of uncertainty. "That's just it. He isn't playing the same game. It's like he's watching us, waiting for us to make a mistake, and we've already made so many." The silence that followed hung heavy in the air, both men knowing that there was truth in Zelkor's words. They had underestimated Reyes. They had expected him to fight back in the same way every other enemy had. But Reyes wasn't like any other opponent they had faced. He was something entirely new, something that made all their strategies, all their plans, seem outdated and useless. Meanwhile, Reyes continued his slow journey through the city. He wasn't lost. He wasn't confused. He wasn't searching for anything in particular. He was simply moving. His path was deliberate, but there was no hurry. His mission wasn't about speed. It was about presence. He had already noticed the changes in the city. The once bustling streets were now silent. The bright lights dimmed. People huddled in their homes, their eyes glued to the windows, afraid to go outside. The panic that had gripped them was palpable, but Reyes wasn't concerned with the panic. He wasn't trying to cause chaos or confusion. His objective wasn't about scaring them. It was about something far more subtle. He wanted to show them something. He wanted them to understand that control was an illusion, a fragile thing that could crumble in an instant. As Reyes walked, he passed by a group of young children huddling in an alleyway, looking out at him with wide, uncertain eyes. Their faces were a mix of curiosity and fear, their tiny hands clutching each other as they tried to make sense of the stranger in their midst. Reyes paused for just a moment, his gaze meeting theirs. He offered them no words, no reassurance. But there was a certain calmness in his demeanor that seemed to reassure them, just for a moment. The children watched as Reyes continued on his way, his figure slowly disappearing into the distance. The tension they had been holding on to seemed to loosen, if only slightly. As Reyes continued his slow march through the city, the questions that had once lingered in the minds of the syndicate were beginning to spread to the people. What did Reyes want? Why was he here? Was he going to destroy everything? Or was there something more? The uncertainty was beginning to spread like a wildfire. The more people tried to figure out what was happening, the more they felt like they were being drawn into something much bigger than they had anticipated. Something that, no matter how much they tried, they couldn't control. They could no longer rely on their weapons, their power, or their strategies. The people of Tharnos Prime were waking up to a reality they had never imagined. They were learning that the world they had built, the systems they had trusted, could be shattered in an instant, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Reyes had achieved what no one had thought possible. He had made the people realize their own vulnerability, and in doing so, he had broken the illusion that they had spent so long trying to protect. As the shadows grew longer, Reyes remained steady in his pursuit. The game wasn't over yet. But one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. The moon rose high over Tharnos Prime, casting a pale glow across the city. It was an eerily quiet night, with only the soft hum of the city's infrastructure breaking the silence. The streets, which had once been filled with life, were now eerily still. The last few days had felt like a long, drawn-out wait, as if everyone had been holding their breath, unsure of what would happen next. Reyes had finally reached the heart of the city. It wasn't a place he'd been aiming for, but it was where he had ended up. The central district was vast, its towering skyscrapers reaching up into the sky, their windows reflecting the cold light of the moon. It was a place of power and wealth, where the syndicate's leaders had their offices, and where the decisions that shaped the galaxy were made. Reyes had no interest in power, but he had an undeniable pull toward places like this. It wasn't the wealth or the politics that drew him in. It was the way these places represented control. Control that was now slipping through their fingers. As Reyes stood on the rooftop of one of the tallest buildings, gazing down at the empty streets below, he felt something shift inside him. It was a quiet feeling, but it was there. He had made his point. The people of Tharnos Prime had been unsettled, yes, but now they were beginning to understand something they hadn't before. The Syndicate's power wasn't absolute. It never had been. And in time, they would see that. Meanwhile, back in the Syndicate's command center, Orak was pacing again. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. His team had tried every measure they could think of to track Reyes, but nothing had worked. They had tried to send out drones, initiate surveillance on key locations, and even use specialized technology to locate him, but Reyes had evaded them every step of the way. Why hasn't he struck yet? Orak muttered to himself, running his hand through his hair in frustration. He's here somewhere, but he doesn't seem to be in any rush. Zelkor, who had been silent for most of the evening, spoke up. Maybe that's the point. Maybe he's waiting for us to make the first move. He's not here to destroy us. He's here to make us see something, to show us that we don't control this city or this galaxy. Orak shot him a sharp look. Enough with the riddles, Zelkor. We don't have time for this. Zelkor didn't back down. I'm serious, Orak. I think he's trying to teach us something. We've built our empire on the idea that we're untouchable, that we control everything. But he's been here for days, and he hasn't attacked. He's been waiting for us to realize that we're not as powerful as we think we are. Orak paused, considering his words. So, you're saying he's toying with us? That we're the ones making all the mistakes? Zelkor nodded. Yes. And the longer we wait, the more we're proving him right. It was a harsh truth, one that Orak didn't want to admit, but he couldn't deny it. They had been reacting to Reyes instead of anticipating his moves. They had been trying to find him, chase him down, but he was always one step ahead. Every action they took only made him seem more untouchable, more mysterious, and the fear among the people of Tharnos Prime was growing by the day. Reyes, for his part, didn't care about the syndicate's struggle. He wasn't concerned with their leadership or their attempts to track him down. He didn't need to fight them, didn't need to overpower them. He had already achieved what he set out to do. He had made them question everything. For a brief moment, Ray stopped on the rooftop and closed his eyes. The city stretched out before him, its sprawling skyline shimmering under the night sky. He felt the weight of the years he had spent fighting, the struggles, the wars, the endless battles that had shaped him into who he was. But now none of that mattered. He was here, not for revenge, not for victory, but to show them something. To show them that even the most powerful forces in the universe were vulnerable. That no matter how much control they thought they had, there was always something greater than them. And that was the lesson he had been trying to impart. A low rumble of engines broke his thoughts. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, closer. He could hear the hum of airspeeders, the shifting of gears and metal as they moved through the city. The syndicate had decided to take action. They were deploying a special task force, armed with all their most advanced technology, to find him and bring him down. But Reyes wasn't worried. He wasn't concerned with their weapons or their tactics. In fact, he welcomed the challenge. If they wanted to face him, if they wanted to try and regain the control they had lost, he would let them. But he wasn't going to make it easy for them. He didn't need to. The fear they felt was already enough. The uncertainty was already enough. They had already lost. As the syndicate's task force closed in on his location, Reyes remained still, waiting for them to make the first move. He had no intention of running or hiding. They would come to him, and when they did, they would understand. They would understand that it wasn't about strength or weapons or power. It was about something deeper. It was about what they couldn't see, what they had never understood. Reyes didn't need to be a conqueror. He didn't need to destroy or defeat. All he had to do was be. And in that simple act, he had already won. The syndicate was about to learn just how far-reaching the consequences of their control could be.